Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to talk about my experiences with all the little different details of the Witchwood expansion and kind of offer my criticism and solutions to the problem, as, well, they'll probably not be given much attention, but regardless, I'm sure some of you guys would fancy how I would change things personally. Now, the Witchwood expansion has been out for a few weeks now. We just got the Monster Hunt mode, which basically completes all the different promised aspects of the expansion. And finally, I feel I can give my full review on the Witchwood expansion. And, well, overall, it's not very good. So, a little bit of background before we get into the details. At the first expansion of every year, there is the standard rotation, which makes it so 3 expansions of old rotate out of standard, which is the main gameplay that most people experience. And as a result, there is a fairly high expectation, and this high expectation has been met year after year for the game to change in a radical way, as well with the removal of half of the standard cards, expansion cards, I guess. The game usually, and I say usually because this expansion was the exception, feels very fresh. All the decks are typically new. The game interaction, gameplay, all that is all pretty new. And this time around it didn't really happen. As the expansion rolled underway, the standard format was basically plagued with very similar decks that we experienced in the previous set. And that's a real shame, because that honestly should not happen. When you cut out half the cards, if people are playing the same thing, you've messed up. Really, that's the end of it. The 2 decks that were very dominant at the start of the expansion were some forms of cube/control lock, which is still doing very well right now, and many different versions of Paladin. Odd Paladin was the best odd deck, Even Paladin was the best even deck, and neither odd or even, just Paladin, usually featuring lots of Murlocs, was, well, the best non-even, non-odd deck. So basically, Paladin had the best 3 decks. And sadly, I have to say that hasn't changed much. It changes day by day. The healthy side of the meta is that there are a lot of decks being played right now. And as a result, the meta changes day to day. If you check out the win records on Vicious Syndicate, Tempo Storm, or Hearthstone Replay, which is where most of my stats come from these days, you will see that on any given day, Paladin will not have the 3 best decks, but it will usually have 2, and those 2 will rotate. On some days, Odd Paladin will be the best. On some days, Even Paladin will be the best. On other days, Murloc Paladin will be the best. But basically, Paladin will be the best. That's kind of how it works. And the gameplay against these Paladin decks is very much the same. Even though odd and even play literally completely different decks, the game plan is very much the same. Flood the board, win more, play a bunch of dudes efficiently, and push your opponent out of the game through hero power use. And yeah, when you're playing against these decks, well, of course they are very different. The gameplay is very much the same. So Paladin has been a really big offender in this meta. I think Blizzard should absolutely go back and nerf some of the cards that Paladin is currently using. Now that is really tricky, and that gets me to my next point. A lot of the power level from these aggressive decks comes from either odd or even activators, and it's really difficult to nerf that, because what are you going to do? Like, take a look at Baku. Baku is an absolute trash tier card by himself, and he enables an effect for all the different classes. So how do you nerf a card like that? The only way you can realistically nerf a card like that is by nerfing individual buffed hero powers. So for instance, take Baku, for example. When it comes to Paladin, spawning 2 1/1 dudes is really very oppressive. It becomes a game plan where 2 1/1s is about as good as a 2-drop. You can play so many more 1-drops because you're playing an aggressive deck. So yeah, you just get pushed out of the game, and they're constantly pumping out value through the Baku hero power. Now, this also leads into a situation where anything that buffs Silverhand recruits, because you have 2 of them and you have many more as the game progresses, becomes really insane. Just as a side note, Baku decks even Baku Paladin are some of the best decks in wild mode. So if you're expecting for the next expansions to knock out these decks from the meta, you are kidding yourself. That is not going to happen. The only way these Baku aggressive decks or the even Paladin or the Murloc, the only way these decks are no longer going to be the top decks being played in the standard format is if Blizzard nerfs them. That is the only way that's going to happen. These decks are simply way too good. One possible nerf, for instance, with the Odd Paladin is just to nerf the upgraded Paladin hero power. That's not necessarily too big of a deal because it really only works with Baku. The only other way to upgrade your hero power is through Justicar, which is not being played. Let's not joke ourselves. That card is not seeing any play whatsoever. So if we made the Paladin hero power rather than 2/1/1s, maybe we made it 1/3/1 minion. That's no longer a Silver Hand recruit. Maybe it's a Silver Hand Knight. Breaks some of the card synergy, makes it so there's not as many minions that are needed to clear, makes the deck more vulnerable against aggressive decks. I think that's a pretty reasonable nerf that honestly we should expect, realistically. The even Paladin is a little bit trickier. It might need some nerfs to Sunkeeper Tarm or something like that. It's kind of what makes it work. Those super board swingy cards, possibly a mana nerf to Call to Arms might be required. Call to Arms is a card that at 4 mana is absurdly unfair. I think at 5 mana, it's closer to fair, but still insanely good. It's just if you make the card 5 mana, it escapes the odd and even breakpoints of Paladin. So maybe that is the required nerf for Call to Arms. Call to Arms will see just as much play in decks that are not odd or even, but odd decks that are now able to run Call to Arms can only pull 1-drops, which makes the card kind of mediocre, and even decks just can't run the card anymore. So I like that nerf quite a lot. It certainly doesn't kill the card. I think this card is playable at 6 mana. 4 is just outrageous. So I think some combination of balance changes towards aggressive Paladin decks is in order. Control Paladin decks are so bad, I tried my hardest to make one and couldn't really push anything out there. Control Paladin decks are awful, and aggro Paladin is working off of a few but extremely broken set of cards, largely the ones I just mentioned. The other big problem is Warlock. I think they should probably just do something with the Warlock Death Knight card rather than making it summon every demon that died this game. Maybe every demon that died and was played this game. So you can kind of, nerf the aspect of generating and cubing and, cheating out cards from your deck and all that. I don't know. Just something. I don't think the meta is revolving around Warlock right now, but it's important to know that we just played like 6 months of cube lock and crap. So people want to change. When a new expansion comes out, people want to play a new version of Hearthstone. And Warlock, even though it's not the meta-defining deck right now, it's almost there. It's a very good deck. It prevents people from experiencing a new version of Hearthstone. So I think something should be addressed with Warlock as well. And lastly, I want to talk about Quest Rogue. So Quest Rogue is a bit of an anomaly. This deck has actually come back, and Quest Rogue makes it so you can't really have any fun. And this is why. Quest Rogue is possibly the most oppressive deck in Hearthstone that I have ever seen. The reason is the only way that you beat Quest Rogue is by playing aggro, by going face before it can get its combo. If you have a mid-range or control or, God forbid, combo deck, you will get obliterated. There's no chance you can keep up with Quest Rogue once the quest goes off. It's absolutely impossible. I play some of the craziest, slowest control decks, and I've never seen it happen myself. Now, this makes it so Quest Rogue has like upwards of 85% win rate against slow decks, and in some cases, roughly 15% win rate against some hyper aggro decks, namely Tempo Mage, which I profusely hate as well, by the way, but let's not talk about that for now. So, Quest Rogue is just unbelievably oppressive, and it pushes a meta that people are forced to play aggro decks. I feel aggro decks, this is my traditional opinion on aggro decks in Hearthstone, they break the version of the game that I like. I understand aggro versus aggro can have some of the most crazy decision impactful games ever, but that's all it can have. Aggro sets the pace of the game. Aggro is way too good and has been way too good in Hearthstone for a really long time. If someone chooses to play aggro, they are choosing the game that their opponent is going to play. If someone plays control, it's not necessarily the case. If you play like aggro versus control, most likely the aggro deck will dictate the pace of play. You need to have a board clear or you're going to die. You're going to have to remove my must remove 2-drop or you're going to die. Can you do those things? Well, if you can't, you're dead and the game is ending in like 2 minutes, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about. There's not much power for the other decks in the game. If I want to play a control version of Hearthstone, it's like, well, Krip, just play a control deck. Well, I do. I try, and what often, not always, but often ends up happening is I get pushed up by aggro decks far more often than I should. Aggro decks fundamentally are very bad in Hearthstone, in my opinion, because, the power level of an aggro deck is basically how good is your opening hand and your first 3 draws. That basically dictates the game. So we look at win rates, we see that, Quest Rogue is kind of balanced because it loses to aggro decks, and then we have a lot of people playing aggro decks, and then those aggro decks are like 50-50, 40-60 matchups against one another, and we're like, wow, that's some pretty healthy metagame. So many different classes, so many close matchups. Well, it's not really that. You know what a close matchup is? You take a coin and you flip it. Perfect balance, right? No, I think there needs to be a lot more context to how these games are being played and how they should be played. Playing aggro versus aggro and basically whoever gets the best opening hand plus first 2 draws, it's not really a whole lot of gameplay most of the time. Playing aggro against control, it's not a whole lot of gameplay most of the time. Playing Quest Rogue versus anything, there's not really any gameplay whatsoever in that department. So basically what I'm getting at, even though there are some really broken classes and stuff right now, the main problem with the ranked system right now is that there are not a lot of decisions. Win or lose, there are not a lot of things that you can do as a player to leverage your experience and ability to play the game, and that sucks. So I think it's important that Blizzard takes a stand on a lot of the things that are really out of balance. I think Blizzard, honestly, I think they should just completely kill Quest Rogue. I think they should just shoot Quest Rogue in the head. I think they should make it so. Play 10 minions of the same name. I don't care. You think that's bad? Well, have a look at the old Warsong Commander, and you can see what bad nerfs look like. Blizzard has not shied away from completely killing off cards, and honestly, killing off Quest Rogue might just be due at this point. Now, there are some elegant nerfs, like when the quest is played, it just transforms the minions in your deck and hand to 5/5, so, bounce effects won't completely get out of control. But again, I would not mind a heavy-handed nerf to Quest Rogue. So that's kind of the encompassing meta for ranked. There needs to be a lot of changes, and if Blizzard is not capable of pinpointing them, because there are a lot of decks being played right now, which is fair, I think Blizzard should, at the very least, buff a few random cards every month or so. Constant balance patches are going to keep the game fresh, regardless of balance, but inaction is not going to work. I think if we are going to experience like a month of inaction, the ranked system in Hearthstone will be extremely stale and the player base will probably dive off a cliff. Now, the other aspects of Hearthstone, they have been a bit more promising. Let's go over Monster Hunt, for instance. Witchwood's Monster Hunt dungeon run mode, I think, has been very successful. It just hasn't been as much content as the last expansion. When there is an expansion, I kind of expect at least as much content as the previous expansion, right? Well, we didn't really get that. In terms of the design behind the adventures, in terms of design behind the bosses for Monster Hunt, I think even though it is a little bit easier and a little bit more RNG, I think the fun level of Monster Hunt is as good as Dungeon Run. So they have very well succeeded on that. Where they have failed is there's just not enough content. I've been playing Monster Hunt for like 3 to 4 days now, and I'm basically done playing Monster Hunt. With Dungeon Run, I played a lot more than that. There was a lot more things you could do, you could learn. There's a lot more Easter eggs in the encounters. There were some really, really difficult ones that were very rare. There was just more content. I would say at least twice as much content. So yeah, I feel like we just didn't get enough out of this expansion compared to the last one. And, well, why not? It was the same amount of period between this expansion and the last one. It honestly feels like they gave less attention to the balance of cards in this expansion compared to the last one. So, where's the rest of the Monster Hunt, Blizzard? That's my main criticism with that. But again, if you haven't played Monster Hunt, if you haven't played Hearthstone in a while, come in and check it out. I think you will be pretty pleased with the actual content involved. Lastly, with Arena, the game mode of choice of the Kripparrianos here. Arena, in my opinion, took a massive dive when they decided to make decks completely insane. They did that about a month and a half ago, kind of as like a test, and I detested it. I basically thought Arena was dead at that point. And fortunately, Blizzard agreed. Less than a week later, they came in and hotfixed it and made decks actually kind of bad. Now, I talked about why I want these decisions in the past, so I'll give you guys the quick rundown, not the huge details. But the idea is, if you are playing Arena and chasing the same constructed decks that you're playing in Constructed, if you're chasing those same crazy power level cards, and you're getting them, like 3 or 4 copies of them, well, you're not really making much in the way of decisions when you're drafting, and the Arena gameplay experience is not very different than Constructed experience. So what's the point of doing that, right? So less than a week after they did that, this is a month and a half ago, they made decks super crappy, and basically you unlock the rest of the game. Constructed revolves around, let's say, 10% of the card pool. The best of the best get seen playing Constructed, and the rest don't see play anywhere whatsoever. So Arena was that game mode where kind of that middle section of cards were actually being played. You're playing with cards that you were not playing anywhere else. It was a different experience each time there was a new expansion, and it was, you know, in a section of the card pool that would otherwise never see any light. So it was a great experience, and when they nerfed the power level of the decks, we actually played with these cards. For a period of about 3 weeks, I would say Arena was possibly its best ever since launch. I think it was that good. A day or two before the expansion went live, Blizzard, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make Arena decks completely insane again, and not only is this a really bad decision that we just experienced, it followed a standard rotation, so it was extra bad. It was extra bad because not only were people chasing the same cards that they were playing in Constructed, but there was half as many because we just had a standard rotation. So we started seeing decks that have, like, well, I don't know, 5 and 7 copies of the same cards that are Constructed quality. The average deck that I've played in Arena right now has like 2 Blizzards. It has like 2.5 Volcanoes. It's just completely insane. There's also a bit of the bleed of the crazy card quality that Paladin is experiencing in Arena right now. The Arena balance, look, it's been worse than this, but this is not good. Right now, Paladin and Rogue is really out of control. It's largely because Paladin is out of control, and Rogue does notably well against Paladin. So Paladin is basically crushing it in Standard, crushing it in Wild, and kind of crushing it in Arena. When you're experiencing your opponents playing over 33% of any given class in Arena, which many people have experienced in the case of Paladin, that basically, because you're only offered 3 classes when you play Arena, that basically means that not only is every person picking Paladin when they're given the chance in Arena, but they're winning that much more than the other classes that they could pick. That's how you actually see more than 1 in 3 players playing Paladin in Arena. It's kind of mind-blowing. To kind of sum it up, this expansion is pretty weak. You know, let's not kid ourselves. And, you know, a few weeks have passed. Hearthstone has changed hands in the developer side of things. We lost the Broad, we lost a few other devs, we have some new talent on the team. I think it's time that Blizzard really tried something new and gave us changes ASAP. I understand it takes a few weeks to kind of understand what's going on, but I think those weeks are up. I do not expect any more change in Arena. I do not expect any more change in Constructed in terms of the meta or whatever. This is what it is, and this is not particularly good. So yes, Blizzard really has to step in and make some of these changes because, well, I don't know if players in general, in masses, will have the patience to wait out another 3 months for the next expansion. I think the reason why I say that is because the statistics on a lot of these decks can look deceptive. There's a lot of decks that are like 60-40, 50-50 against one another, but they're all like the same aggro decks, and Blizzard balancing the game around aggro is just really cheap and shallow. Basically, if you just have a decent aggro deck versus a decent aggro deck, it's just going to be 60-40 because you're only playing with the top 5 cards in the deck. You're leveraging the RNG in the game to kind of cover up balance. So I don't think that's good enough, and I hope you guys agree with me. Let me know what you think. Let me know your experiences so far, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.